But I think this is a special day in the sense that we want to celebrate a summing up of the experience of our party and of the working class. And my efforts are not the work of one individual, of myself. They sum up the experiences of our party and of the working class, not just in Britain, but internationally. Now, originally, we conceived of this meeting tonight as really covering two aspects, again, as Paula has said. The launch of the book, and we want it to be sold as widely as possible. I have to confess, it's not an easy and a simple book. When you go home, make sure you put it not too high on your bookshelf in case it falls on you, and then you sue us for compensation. But it's a very thorough job, I believe, about the history of our organisation. But the meeting was conceived to discuss that, and we will, and also this absolutely vital general election that is taking place today. Now, we've had this Manchester bombing, this terrible incident which involved a massacre of children, and that touches every individual, actually, in the only way that this can happen. But we have been implacably opposed to terrorism, as this book explains, in relation to Ireland, in relation to the different forms of Islamic terrorism, if you like, the Afghan war. We even wrote a book, or wrote a small book, in relation to the origins of Al-Qaeda, which showed the role that Saudi Arabia played and Wahhabism played, and we warned about these developments and the way that they could take place on an international scale. And we said that these methods are wrong, particularly from those on the left who cheered on some people using these methods. We didn't. We always emphasized and re-emphasized the role of the working class as the most important class in society, coming together in a collective spirit, using their power and the methods of the working class, of strikes, of meetings like this, of strikes, of struggles, of general strikes, to, if you like, right the wrongs of working people internationally. And we said, inevitably, it is innocent working class people who will suffer. You have to say that this form of Islamic terrorism, and in a way that's wrong to describe it in that way, it's right-wing Islamic fundamentalism, and particularly in the form that it's taken in ISIS, so-called Daesh, a kind of death wish, but it's fascistic in the indiscriminate methods that they use. That's not to say that they are a fascist organisation in the classical sense of the term, because fascism is not possible, la Hitler and Mussolini today, as a mass organisation or a mass movement of the middle class used against the organisations of the working class. And above all, terrorism is counterproductive. It leads to state repression. Look, for the first time now, we have the possibility, in fact, inevitably, in a small way, probably to begin with, of the army on the streets of Britain, like in France. And that inevitably will lead to repression. It will lead to the problems, compounding the problems of the labour movement and the working class. And terrorism, ultimately, the causes of terrorism are in poverty, in repression, and in wars. And how hypocritical it is for Trump to be going through the Middle East at the present time, like a 10-year-old child with a box of matches, lighted matches, dropping them as he goes along the way, causing uproar and causing potential problems for working people in the Middle East and internationally as well. And as Patrick Cockburn, in an article in The Independent today, pointed out, he's a capitalist commentator. He does not agree with us on the social solution, but he made some excellent points when he pointed out that Trump and the rest of them were identifying the wrong target when they pointed towards Iran. It's not Iran that is the fountainhead of terror. It's the regime that Trump was meeting with, and that is Saudi Arabia Wahhabism, the kind of death cult that goes with it. It's quite incredible. I mean, for the younger generation who are here today, here is the Saudi Arabian regime that generated the leaders of Al-Qaeda, that gave them the resources and the money, that nurtured them and so on. And here is the representative of America shaking hands with this bloody regime, and the only thing he's concerned about is the amount of arms that they can sell to Iran, to Saudi Arabia, and benefit the peoples of America and the world as a whole. What a sick philosophy that is. We've heard in the wake of the bombing in Manchester that people should come together, and that's very good. There's a natural inclination, especially amongst working people, to get together, to comfort one another. But the real solution for coming together should be to provide an alternative to the kind of rotten society that nurtures the kind of murderous terrorists that we've seen here and on other occasions. And that means the organised power of the working class, mobilised on day-to-day issues, confronting working people and offering a long-term solution to working people themselves. The terrorism inevitably has a reactionary effect. And we no need to go further than the general election. Isn't it the case that prior to the bombing, Theresa May was on the ropes? We all know that, because of the massive backlash that has taken place over the so-called dementia tax, the inheritance tax, which meant that in Wales, the situation was entirely transformed, even in the opinion polls, where there was a 10% increase for Labour, and in fact Labour is now ahead in Wales. And who knows what that situation is in the rest of Britain at the present time. Prior to this, if you believe the press, the television and the media, the upcoming general election was going to be a shoo-in. It was guaranteed as far as Theresa May and the leadership of the Tory party and the overwhelming majority of the commentators were concerned. But now we have a change of tone. We have fear now on behalf of what we call the strategists of capital. It's not at all guaranteed now that May can win the election itself. It's not just the Manchester bombing. It's also the appeal of Corbyn's manifesto, Labour's manifesto, and the speeches that he has made on the hustings. It may not go as far as we would like, I will explain that, but nevertheless it's resonating with workers and young people in particular. Look at, for instance, the one issue that he's raised, to offer to cancel tuition fees, and not in the dim and distant future. If there's a Labour government after June the 9th, he said he will cancel tuition fees from September. And that is a marvellous liberation, potentially, of young people. One of the greatest crimes against young people was the introduction of tuition fees by, let's remember this, by a Blair-led Labour government. And what most people don't know, but it's explained in this book, that the biggest protest against Blair was not over the Iraq War, which generated those huge demonstrations, but was over tuition fees. He admitted in his biography that the nearest the government came to being toppled was over tuition fees. And that's an extra reason why young people in particular should be prepared to vote against the Tories and for Jeremy Corbyn and a Jeremy Corbyn-led Labour government itself. Also, the launch of our book is relevant in this respect as well. We carried an extract in the pages of the Socialist Party a couple of weeks ago. The launch of this book is also the 20th anniversary of the Blair government coming to power in 1997. And what a shameful period in history that was, in the sense of the destruction of the socialist aspirations of the Labour movement, which converted the Labour Party really into the second 11, a pro-capitalist party, which it has been up to the leadership contest in relation to Jeremy Corbyn itself. And we had an example of this, even today, in the Financial Times. By the way, when the so-called the tax on property and so on, which is now abandoned, over the weekend, on the very day that the bomb went off in Manchester, the Financial Times had a report of the reaction inside the ranks of the Tory party. And they make the following point. One senior Conservative figure admitted the reaction on the campaign trail to the policy of being hostile. Quote, "It's gone down like a pile of dog poo." They're very polite, by the way. Not like workers in the juicy language of workers, but nevertheless, you get the point. And this demonstrates above all that there's one thing that motivates the Tories is power. They will do anything to retain power. They would sell their grandmother, and they're prepared to sell other people's grandmothers as well in relation to the inheritance tax itself. But, notwithstanding what has happened in the past period, it's still possible that Jeremy Corbyn could be pushed over the line in the election on June the 8th. He may not get an overall majority because, unfortunately, unlike us who've had a very flexible approach on the national question and supported the right of self-determination of the Scottish people, unbelievably, even in the manifesto of the Labour Party, they oppose a referendum in Scotland. That has been a gift to the SNP, and even to the Tories, by the way. They haven't benefited by it. The Tory party in Scotland has benefited, if you like, from the unionist vote itself. We consistently have argued, of course, for the right of self-determination, including of the right of a referendum, and even of an independent Scotland. We're not separatists in the sense that we want to divide workers. That could be a step towards a voluntary confederation, a socialist confederation of England, Wales, Scotland and Ireland. But that mistake has already been made, and that probably means that there could not be a majority government even in the best scenario. There will be, and there is a possibility, of Labour emerging as the biggest party in the general election itself. Of course, there are big obstacles to this. Jeremy Corbyn himself has made some earlier mistakes. I'm not going to dwell on that. I don't have the time. But he was very bold in the way that he launched the manifesto. Even when it was leaked, it had the desired effect and began to transform the situation. But I'd just like to read to you an extract from the London Review of Books, not just of the manifesto, but when he launched the campaign for Labour. And he makes the following point. Much of the media and the establishment are saying that this election is a foregone conclusion. They think there are rules in politics which you don't follow by doffing your cap to powerful people, accepting that things can't really change, then you can't win. But of course, they do not want us to win. Because when we win, it is the people, not the powerful, who win. The nurse, the teacher, the small trader, the carer, the builder, the office worker, the student, the carer wins. And he goes on in that vein. And he says, I don't play by their rules. And if a Labour government is elected on the 8th of June, then we won't play by their rules as well. That was a warning to the ruling class. And that's why they have moved heaven and earth in order to vilify Corbyn. You know, Evan Davis, you all reluctantly watch Newsnight. He's the presenter of Newsnight. He's just written a book. And you know what the name of the book is? Bullshit. And it's very appropriate. He actually says, bullshit in decline. He means fake news. But it is a summing up of the denigration campaign that's been conducted by the Tories in the course of this election. But actually, not yet, but what we have in the response of Labour and what we have in the response of Corbyn in particular is a demonstration of how you can ignore this massive propaganda machine of the media. You can answer it, let's put it like that, of the media, of the television, of the press, and so on. And if you doubt that, we in this room, this party, This organisation, in 2 books, we've described this. In Liverpool in 1983 to 1987, we had the whole of the press against this. We didn't get one kind word of support from the Liverpool Echo. On the contrary, they carried a headline saying the Holy Father, the Pope, is opposed to the militant and is threatening to excommunicate them, even though half of the councillors were Protestants and weren't Catholics. It's an indication of the campaign that was conducted. The campaign in relation to the poll tax. It seemed as though we were isolated with the welter of campaigns that were conducted. And by the way, this is in the year of the Russian Revolution, the anniversary of the Russian Revolution. And that's a very good lesson for us. Because in the Russian Revolution, when Lenin landed in Russia in April 1917, the propaganda was such that even the revolutionary sailors, if they would have caught Lenin, would have bayoneted him and killed him. And that went on. That kind of campaign went on right up to the eve of October. And yet it cut no ice with the mass of the working class because of their objective conditions. And moreover, the message of the Bolsheviks found an echo amongst the peasant masses as well. And it's these objective conditions that determine how this struggle in this election and how it will be conducted. It's not the only factor, but more importantly, in a way, how the struggle will be conducted after the general election itself. You know, there is one figure that sums up the terrible dilemma facing working people in Britain today. It was given by all people Gordon Brown, whose government presided over the worsening of the conditions of the working class and was the joint author of New Labour with Tony Blair, who destroyed or attempted to destroy the socialist aspirations of the Labour movement. And yet Gordon Brown has been compelled to remark that by 2021-2, 5.1 million children will be living in poverty. 37% of the total, 2/3 in families where someone is working. So you have the destitute, you have the poor, and you have the working poor. This will come. The climb in poverty could come to 5.7 million. This is a worse position than even existed in Margaret Thatcher's Britain. That's a terrifying prospect confronting working people on the basis of this system. And if you think you can work hard and get out of the dilemma that's confronting working people, just ponder for a moment. Wages, if you're lucky to have a job, that is, a Mickey Mouse job, or you're working 2 or 3 jobs, will be no higher in 2002 than before the economic crisis of 2007-8. £10 an hour, I think that's the minimum that people should be able to live on in London. It's a pipe dream under capitalism. We know that because the Financial Times and the bosses have told us. Nevertheless, we have to fight for £10 an hour. The stagnation in wages in Britain today means we have a worse position, a greater period of stagnation since Napoleon was in power, and not Napoleon II, but Napoleon I, 200 years ago. This has had a devastating effect on living standards. What is this except the perspective of endless poverty as far as working people are concerned? Now contrast that perspective to the obscenity of the royal wedding that took place recently. I forget the name of the cousin of the whatever the royalty was. But she had to fly past some Spitfires. And the total cost of the wedding came to a minimum of £1 million. What an obscenity and what a mocking of the problems of working people itself. The energy prices are increasing where we have fuel poverty. May and the Tories wanted it so bad that they stole the clothing of Ed Miliband and then came forward with the idea of a cap. We have this and we have the threats of strikes, which is very unusual in a general election, when usually peace is declared and the right-wing trade union leaders are reluctant to go on strike. Nevertheless, they've been under pressure because of the terrible conditions of working people, for strikes to be threatened in Royal Mail, the nurses and the strikes of the RMT were only suspended in order to honour the victims of the Manchester bombing themselves. And you know, there are some commentators, for instance, in The Guardian, one of them, Chakraborty, who does quite good material describing the conditions of working people. But he had an article that was incredible about a week and a half ago, in which he says Labour will be defeated because the working class have been crushed. Now, it's true that massive deindustrialisation and the destruction of high-paid jobs, industrial jobs, long-term jobs and permanent jobs in large parts of Britain have been destroyed. And now we have people only able to get by on 2 and sometimes 3 jobs with very low wages. But nevertheless, the conditions facing those workers and others are the classical conditions that faced the working class and led to the development of trade unions, led to the development of the Labour Party in the first place, led to the collective consciousness of working people taking to the road of struggle. And that's why we have, for instance, junior doctors and nurses accepting the methods of struggle of the working class, of the strike, of picket lines and so on. We have a situation now, if this goes on for another 5 years, the conditions that people will face, working people will face, will be on a par with the conditions that George Orwell described in his Road to Wigan Pier. There can be absolute destitution. I'm not saying this on the basis of whistling it out of our thumbs, but on a careful study and analysis of the developments of capitalism at this stage. Theresa may have a heart of gold, although it's not much evident in the campaign that she's conducted. But that's not the point. She is the prisoner, like the front bench of New Labour, of this system that is in crisis itself. She's even gone to the extent, under pressure, to denounce inequality and to denounce untrammelled markets. She's trying to doff a radical position because she can feel the hot breath of the discontent of working people on her neck, despite all the sweet words about helping the poor and the most laughable phrase before and during this general election that the Tories are now the party of working people itself. They're allowed, by the way, to get away with that because the right wing in the Labour Party are indistinguishable from the Tories, from so-called left-wing Tories today. But go below the surface. And what we have in the presence of May is really Thatcher today. So therefore, these are the conditions that are developing or exist and are existing irrespective of what Theresa May intends or what the Tories say in their weasel words and so on. The question is how to combat these conditions and how we can win in this election and in future elections as well. And that poses the question of preparing for the election only 2 weeks today and what the consequences of that is likely to be. And above all, we believe in telling working people the truth. We believe calling things by their right name. You know, a Marxist revolutionary party, a party can be summed up as in the consciousness of working people, summing up the consciousness of the working people. And history is important to us because those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. It's very easy to forget about history. A reformist party, like we had in the form of Blair and Brown, is a party of short memories. Marxism is a party of long memories because we have to draw the lessons from history. And everything, the capitalists can try and do everything to try and destroy an organisation like ours before it becomes a powerful force. They were frightened by the developments in the poll tax. They were frightened by the march of events in Liverpool. And in this book, we give an example. I've got a very nice photograph here of myself in Italy with a fellow called Carlo Neri. You can see him, he's translating for me at a meeting in Italy. And this man was formerly a member of our organisation. But he was also a police spy, as was subsequently revealed. And not just with us, but we've been just at the PCS conference this week, and a whole revelation about the way that not just individual police spies like this, but Margaret Thatcher herself and the government were preoccupied with the PCS, and particularly about the role that militants played in the PCS. It's an absolute scandal, and we hope to develop this. This was debated at the PCS conference this week. So they will try everything to try and undermine and nullify the position of militant in the course, or the Socialist Party, in the course of the battle that is taking place and the battles to come. And the key question is, can capitalism get itself out of this hole? And can it go forward to a more benign economic situation, as the capitalist experts say? And it's not us. It's the experts of capitalism, such as Martin Wolf of the Financial Times, who confessed in the pages of the Financial Times that Britain has had a lost decade. In fact, the first lost decade since Karl Marx was alive in the 19th century. A new book has been produced by a German economist which says, "How will capitalism end?" So they're already postulating the end of capitalism. And he comes to the crushing conclusion: the authorities must be scared shitless about what is taking place at the present time. Mervyn King, the governor of the Bank of England, because he's British, is much more polite than that. But he's written a book on the situation of the Bank of England and the last crisis, and he says, and I've got a review of this in the next issue of Socialism Today that will be out very shortly, and in this analysis that we've done, he says it's not a question of if, but when the next crisis will strike, and it will be deepening the problems of world capitalism itself. And in that last crisis, remember, huge amounts of capital was invested. Actually, they used the printing press, more advanced than that, to produce pound notes, dollars, and so on, in order to save the system. It still meant that 10 million workers were sacked in the crisis of 2007-8 between America and Europe. And that crisis, the legacy of that crisis, still exists today in the conditions that exist. The 2 million people in Britain who are on the housing, or will be on the housing list for social housing in the next period, and don't have a cat in hell's chance of getting a job on the basis of this. There's huge indebtedness now in capitalism. This is the best that it gets. They're talking about this. Theresa May is talking about this situation at least stabilising for her and her system. And the reason why she rushed for a snap general election is because she could see the economic storm clouds on the horizon. They could see a new crisis of 2007-8, just as Mervyn King said was likely. And therefore, the Labour movement has a choice: to take to the road of struggle with building up powerful trade unions. And in the last week, it's been very good that we had, for instance, the defeat of the right in unison with the strengthening of the left, albeit on a very low turnout. And that means we have to fight to renovate and build the trade unions. At the conference of the PCS this week, our comrades on the left generally came out on top against the right. And what is evident, by the way, for many of the trade unions, our absence of the old right wing from the trade union ranks at this stage. And the trade unions remain pivotal to the struggle of working people to change conditions. But over and above that, we need a new party of the working class. The Labour Party, as it's presently constituted, you have Jeremy Corbyn, John MacDonald and their supporters, in a sense, valiantly fighting to put forward a radical programme. And by the way, if people don't think that this is not attractive, this is a quote that was carried in the Financial Times after the announcement of the manifesto. This is the first time that policies have resonated with our daily lives. This is the proper Labour Party because of the manifesto. And then a very pertinent comment of one worker: what's the point of being in power if you're just doing Tory policies? And that's exactly our argument in relation to Labour councils who have carried out the dirty work of big business and not stood up for their class as we have throughout the length and breadth of Britain itself. Why did nationalisation, even a partial nationalisation put forward in the Labour manifesto, why did it find such an enthusiastic echo? Because of the huge unpopularity of privatisation. Privatisation means sackings. It means a destruction of services. It means a raising of charges and everything else that goes with that. And therefore, comrades, I think we have to face up to this situation, to the battle that's coming. It's not just the general election. It's the aftermath of the general election, when inevitably the battle will be retied, particularly the struggle on the industrial plane itself. The Labour Party is two parties in one. The pro-capitalist wing is already openly discussing, in the midst of a general election. You have a Labour MP, John Woodcock, who says he wanted to be elected as a Labour MP, but he will not support Jeremy Corbyn for Prime Minister. There's an article in the Financial Times today of the Labour candidate in Sedgefield who openly is quoted as saying, "We don't like Jeremy Corbyn around here, and I particularly don't like him." This is the candidate of the Labour Party. How do you think they're going to act on the day after the election? Go back and play clap-handies? Jeremy Corbyn has said he's going to remain in situ, he's going to fight. We have to keep him to that if Labour loses. If there's not a landslide for May, this could be an interregnum, this general election, when the battle will be rejoined. There's everything to play for in the situation that is opening up. And Corbyn would be in a much stronger position today if he would have adopted our position on the EU, of being in favour of Brexit, but for the workers and the socialist Brexit. We are not narrow nationalists. We're against any policy that sets one worker against another. We're in favour of the right to stay of all workers in Britain. But the EU outlaws the Labour manifesto. The Labour manifesto stands for nationalisation. In the EU constitution, it's outlawed. That's the reality. And yet, they took a pro-EU position before and played with this idea. They would have stood firm, as we did for the workers and the socialist Brexit, linking it to a confederation, a socialist confederation throughout Europe. Labour will be even more solid and even stronger today. So the issue has not been settled. We have to work to try to get a Labour victory, to be more precise, to get a Corbyn victory, and of course as many left MPs as possible. But at the same time, we have to prepare for after the election, both on the political and on the industrial plane. A new movement will develop, the industrial battles will develop. On the political plane, there's a simple choice after the election. The right are conspiring, are trying to organise to get a basis for some kind of centre party. They're openly discussing it in the press that they would link up with the Liberals and probably with the so-called left of the Tory party in a so-called centre party. Though any centre party would not have a clue of how to solve the problems of working people. It's all a show. It's put there to dupe working people. But our position will be very clear and very simple. In the aftermath of the election, if Labour is defeated, then we have to say quite clearly, this unstable relationship of forces cannot and will not go out. And we say to the ranks of the Labour movement, as far as the right wing is concerned, we say very simply, get them out. Let us have once and for all a party that's based on socialist principles, that links the socialist principles to the day-to-day struggles of working people, that links up with our class, that rebuilds from below with a fighting, class struggle, socialist policy, and in that way preparing for the future of the British working class. A step towards that would be buying this book. I say that not from an individual point of view. We hope you'll take at least 10 copies in your bags and carry them around. You probably will fall over if you do. But buy as many of these books, get it out as far as possible. We want you to read it. Please read it, get back to us, say whether you like it or not, what points you think should be discussed. We want a big debate, we want a discussion. We want a discussion here about what I've said and the way forward for the working class, because only by an exchange of ideas, by a clash of ideas even, can you strengthen the movement, can you clarify the way forward and prepare the basis for the working class to organise a movement that this time, in the 21st century, will create a movement that will establish socialism in Britain on a European scale and realise the dream of the pioneers of the labour movement for a socialist confederation throughout the world.